Welcome to another edition of DAV Podcast. I'm Rob Lewis. In early 2023, the men's fashion magazine GQ featured an interview with Robert Spangle, a combat veteran and fashion photographer. In that interview, Spangle laid out his theory that has driven him to explore the clothing choices of individuals in war and conflict zones. His theory is as follows. I've come to believe that style is an innate human aspect of identity. It's something that we do. It's such a deep-rooted human art of expression and self-cultivation that you won't be able to find a desperate enough situation in the world where people are not expressing themselves through style, where it doesn't have a social and an individual power. Spangle was only 12 years old on 9/11. He was a skater kid living in Malibu. But even still, he knew on that fateful day that his future would include the military. And so at the age of 17, he enlisted in the Marine Corps and eventually found his way into the elite realm of Marine Corps reconnaissance. What Spangle didn't realize then was that he was on the artist's path. His deployment to Afghanistan in 2009 and again in 2010 helped form beliefs around how much you can know about someone based on what they are wearing and the context in which they are wearing it.
It wasn't a mindset then because there's a reconnaissance unit of really closely observing people. You're spending days on end in really horrendous conditions, watching people at a distance and just watching them intensely and not being able to have a dialogue with them and not being able to communicate with them and just trying to divine all of the possible information you could just from observing them and observing the environment they're in.
Spangle also had the ingrained traits of service, the discipline, drive, and willingness to take on challenges that he took into his civilian life as he began exploring interests in clothing and art.
For me, getting out of the military, that was 2 or 3 sustained years there where I was just trying a lot of different things. I went to school. I wanted going into fashion design because I just found it exciting and I didn't really know anything about it. And I jumped into that. I studied for 6 months, long enough to know that I wanted to do something really hard and kind of pure with it. And I followed that instinct to bespoke tailoring. I did that for 1.5 years. While I was doing that, I realized that I really enjoyed kind of observing the fashion of other people. That got me into photography. That got me a job offer, which I accepted. And that led me into fashion photography.
Working as a photojournalist, Spangle traveled to Iraq in 2017 and documented the offensive to recapture Mosul from ISIS. He didn't expect there to be a fashion story waiting for him in that intense fighting.
Going there, I thought, okay, this is the last place on earth I'm ever going to see any kind of fashion or style story. It's never going to happen. I'm just here to try to do my best job as a photojournalist, not really knowing what that meant at the time. And even there was like 2 interactions where I noticed where I was like, no, like there's still a fashion narrative here. Fashion still has a lot to say about the human condition, the culture surrounding the conflict and the conflict itself. So first thing was running into the Kurds in northern Iraq and seeing that these guys were beset on all sides by enemies and they were still making an effort every single day to preserve their way of culturally dressing. And that their way, even though it seemed very strange to us, was actually as functional as our military uniforms. The wrap was there to suppress their stomach when they couldn't eat because they were on campaign and to support their back, which I can relate to when they're hiking and fighting in the mountains. And then later on in Mosul, I think second day there, we got to the front line and there was newly minted refugees rushing in between waves of mortar fire and dushka fire down one of these streets. And I realized that all of these refugees, or there were several of them that had picked out their clothes very specifically. There was a mother who had dressed all of her daughters in matching fabric. And this is a part of the world where people make their own clothes. And you had to wonder, like, was this their Sunday best and that's how they wanted to go out? Or was this a way to keep track of her children in the ensuing months of refugee camps and relocation and displacement? Or was it just an accident? Did they just wake up and that happened to be the day they had to leave?
These are the kinds of questions that stayed with Spangle. He was also inspired by the work of the late Tim Hetherington. The British-born war photojournalist was known for capturing stunning and intensely beautiful images in some of the most horrific places. His work with Sebastian Junger on the documentary Restrepo earned the duo the 2011 DAV Bugle Award, as well as an Academy Award nomination. For Hetherington, the award would be posthumous. He was killed by shrapnel in 2011 while covering the Libyan Civil War. When a friend gave Spangle a copy of Hetherington's photo book, Infidel, which depicts U.S. soldiers in combat in Afghanistan, Spangle was thrilled to see a through line connecting military service to art.
I'm looking through it the first time. It gave me such a fresh outlook on my own time in the military. And it wasn't because these pages are filled with horror, violence, and there's some of that. It was like, oh, look at the beauty of this. Look at these guys who have this incredible tribe. Look at how they're progressing. Look at how they're confronting their emotions in a really direct way. I think most people would look at work around conflict, even Hetherington's work, and they could easily just walk away seeing the violence and maybe the machismo or whatever it is. But I see the line of beauty in his work. And I tried to pick up that thread with my own work, partially because I was inspired by him, but partially because I have my own questions about these things.
Following his newly forming line of inquiry, Spangle headed back to the country where he'd previously refined and enhanced his skills of observation, Afghanistan. First in 2021 and then again in 2022 after the U.S. had left the nation and the Taliban had taken over once again, he began taking photos of Afghanistan fashion. Spangle refers to Afghanis as achingly stylish and feels that the images he captured there showcase clothing that reflects a sense of pride. From their ability to put together interesting color contrasts to the combinations of textures, the clothing on display only deepened his intense desire to explore the intersection of fashion and conflict. This fearless exploration led to some fairly incredible discoveries around the ability of fashion to bridge communication gaps. Art in all of its forms and other non-political aspects of our culture like sports can be a force for connection, according to Spangle.
If you can find that common ground, it's like, oh, like you're into this thing and I'm into this thing. You know, the Taliban warlords that I did get my paperwork stamped with, and they loved hunting. Like shotgun bird hunting. Their version involves trucks and it's really crazy. But I was like, yeah, I don't know what we're going to talk about. Like, you're illiterate, you don't care about fashion. I don't even know where to start, right? And I showed them a magazine that I worked with that does a lot of hunting and fish and game stuff. And their eyes lit up. And they got out their cell phone videos and they were showing me these insane videos of them driving around in Corollas on desert flats, just banging away at groups of birds. And suddenly we had this like common ground. And a day or two after that, the conversations I was having with these guys were incredibly personal and, you know, revelatory. They were telling me, a younger guy was telling me that he basically joined because his brother had been killed and he had to earn a living. Another guy was telling me that, you know, he'd been captured by American forces and he wasn't really that radical before, but he became literate in prison and then he got really into it. Another guy was like asking me birth control advice for his wife, which I was like, okay, if I had gone into this room, it'd been like, let's talk about women's rights, this deeper conversation probably never would have happened. So I'm a firm believer that culture is a great vehicle to create common ground.
In the spring of 2023, Spangle's visual treatise on Afghani fashion was brought to life in the form of the book Afghan Style. The striking imagery and accompanying text look appreciatively at the style, silhouettes, colors, materials, and accessories of the men in the country where he once fought as a Marine. More recently, Spangle has taken this exploration to other conflict zones, including Ukraine and Gaza, and the imagery continues to deepen his appreciation and expose the kind of treasure that can only be discovered through brave exploration. The images he's capturing are studies in the intersection of beauty and violence.
There was a young guy who I met the day he had signed up the volunteer unit. Volunteer, but they're still going to the front lines and fighting. And he was wearing Army ACUs that I guess he'd been issued. And he was, I think, 18 or 19 years old. And he'd been issued a rifle, AK-74 type. And he had his sweatshirt tucked into his ACU pants. And the ACU pants were tied with a shoestring. That's something I remember from like skateboarding culture growing up, like using a shoestring and kind of like, wearing a skateboarder style sweatshirt. I just stopped this kid. He's like smoking a cigarette. And I'm like, what, man? Like, I like your belt. Like, you're a skateboarder, When the younger kids in Ukraine speak English. And he's like, what kind of army is this? They can give you a rifle, but not pants that fit. It was kind of like it was a funny moment. It spoke to like the realities of what an entire country mobilizing for existential warfare looks like. The humor that you see in all young men who are going to war. And unfortunately, about 9 months later, again, when I was in Ukraine and I was embedded with the same unit, he was killed, but he died 200 miles behind enemy lines in Russia. So the image itself was an image of youth and kind of skateboarding culture and a country rushing to prepare for war. And yet 9 months later, this unexperienced kid has found himself 200 miles into Russia.
As he explores different settings and styles of his own, he is finding exposure with a wider audience. A photo featuring frontline Ukrainian soldiers and their choice of footwear helps explain why.
It was two guys in the front line wearing Nike Jordans, right? Really iconic basketball shoe. And they ran that on the front page of this article. And I was like, oh, well, it wasn't that wouldn't be my first choice. But that image wound up kind of blowing up all across the internet. And I was a little bit disappointed at first because I was like, I have so many more compelling images about Ukrainian men in, direct combat and the courage that they have and things that they have to confront daily. And this is the one that blows up. But I like this image because the people who are engaging with this image and the websites that were posting it, Instagram accounts, X, Y, and Z that were kind of propagating it, they were mostly ones that were about sneaker culture and, rap and hip hop. And these are exactly the kind of people that I actually want to reach with my work, because there are people who have all the capabilities to be informed about the invasion of Ukraine, but are probably choosing not to. And if I can say something about fashion in the context of conflict, it can be a vehicle, a sort of Trojan horse to create greater awareness and conversations with people who otherwise would choose not to be aware.
Reflecting on his journey from SoCal skater to recon Marine to celebrated photojournalist and fashion photographer, Spangle is able to connect his military service to building a career as an artist. He believes that there's a jet fuel technician with a yearning to write novels and a mortarman who is in love with the idea of being a chef, along with many other service members and veterans who have an interest in the arts, and that they have more going for them than they may know.
The nice thing coming from a military background is like you've been given the discipline and the values that a vast majority of people will never have taught to them or instilled in them. You have those things, you don't really need to worry about them. What you need to concern yourself with, either inside of your military career or if you decide to leave the military, is finding where the intersection of your passion and ability is. The whole process of that can be enjoyable. It's not a 9-to-5 grind. You don't need to break your back doing it. You do need to apply yourself to it. But for me, getting out of the military, that was probably 2 or 3 sustained years there where I was just trying a lot of different things. You've got the discipline, got the values. You owe it to yourself, either inside of the military, outside of the military, to really spend some time exploring and pursuing what it is you're interested in, and taking that to a very deep place to try to find, a line of questioning or a line of passion that will really sustain a career. And the one thing the military is not so good at is like quantifying creative pursuits. So, if it takes a few years of that and you're really trying it each day and you're really opening yourself up to different ideas and kind of trying your hand at a lot of different things, like, don't feel like that is being a hobbyist or a waste of time or not serious. The work of finding what your passion is in life is the beginning of any work that matters. And it should take a long time.
To learn more about Robert Spangle and his work, check out his fascinating Instagram account at 1000 Yard Style. That's 1000 Yard Style with 1000 spelled out. Thanks to Robert for joining us and for walking that challenging path of the artist so that we can be enriched by his work. Until next time.